dirty talk, playing with toys, any type of tying up. All of that falls under the umbrella of kink. Fetish is a major level up from that. A fetish is something where people need a certain thing in order to achieve orgasm. So that might be kink is a nice to have, fetish is a must have, and neither are better than the other. There's just that fundamental difference between them. About 90% of people are kinky, according to the standard definition of it, of liking anything outside of missionary penis and vagina sex. I think most people enjoy a little bit of dirty talk. They'll enjoy role play from time to time. If you could open everybody's bedside drawer, what would you find in there? Everybody, for the most part, loves sex. Not everybody loves talking about sex. We have been taught not to talk about it, to keep it secret, to not stand out too much. Both men and women have been taught this. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but one that's well worth having once you get the ball rolling. The worst thing for me, I think, is knowing that a relationship suffers because they tried to explore something when a simple conversation beforehand may have alleviated a lot of the stress that comes afterwards. So the place I always say to start is, number one.
Hey everybody, quick break in our episode to talk to you about our sponsor, My Libido Doc. One of the things that we truly believe is that great sex is available to everyone, but we just have to learn how. So head over to our site to get your free copy of our ebook, 5 Steps to Mind-Blowing Orgasms and Romance. Get the quick and easy tips to turn your sex life around, rev up your engines, and fall in deeper love and passion with yourself and your partner. So if you just go to mysexdoc.com, you will find that ebook there for download. Now back to our show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Libido Lounge. I'm your host, board-certified sexologist, Dr. Diane Mueller. And we are talking to a kink expert today. This is such an important topic we're talking about today because, as I've talked about so many times on the show, so much of passion and desire really goes away when we start getting into these sexual scripts, when we lose the novelty, when we lose the excitement, when we lose the fantasy, and we just kind of do the same thing over and over again. And what happens to many people is they get a little bored. So I'm so excited to introduce you to Amanda Dames, kink expert, and we're going to talk about that around kink, around fantasy, around novelty, and around how to get a lot of your passion back today. Welcome. Thank you for being with me today, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's really an honor.
It really is an honor to have you. And let's jump right in because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in people between the concepts of kink and fetishes. And there's a lot of myths, I think, around these type of concepts, and people get it sometimes nervous or scared to introduce these things. So let's just set the stage to make sure we're all having the same conversation here. What is the difference? How do we truly define kink and what kink is, and how does that differentiate between that and a fetish?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always joke, I'm the kink consultant, but please don't ask me to define kink because it's so broad, right? And essentially the dictionary would define it as anything that is not considered a normal vanilla relationship, which sadly just boils down to missionary sex. Anything beyond that is considered kinky. Definitely dirty talk, playing with toys, any type of tying up. All of that falls under the umbrella of kink. So it's very broad. And, I think my point is a lot of people exist within the range of kink, if they're trying anything a little bit different. Now, a fetish is a major level up from that. Whereas a kink is a nice to have. It's a nice, fun way to add spice to your relationship. A fetish is something where people need a certain thing in order to achieve orgasm. So that might be someone might have a foot fetish and they need to be thinking about feet or holding feet in order to orgasm. I myself have a spanking fetish or a discipline fetish. I need to be thinking about that or have that element within my sex life to orgasm. And so that's the range we're talking about. Kink is a nice to have, fetish is a must have. And neither are better than the other. There's just that fundamental difference between them. And often the words are interchangeable, which the reason I think it's super important to define it is so people understand you can be kinky without being extreme. It's a real gateway to spice and adding a little bit of fun in the bedroom.
Yeah, I appreciate that definition so much because I do think there's an element of like almost fear or trepidation in some people around like starting to experiment with this. But what does this actually mean? And what does this mean about me if I try this stuff? And I think that differ like just understanding, like even down to, hey, this is just we're wanting to do something other than missionary sex. And it doesn't have to be an obsession. It could be, and there's nothing wrong with it either way. But the most important thing is like understanding this stuff so that you can build a healthier sexual relationship with yourself and your partner, essentially,
Oh,
right?
you put it perfectly. Yes, exactly.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So then let's talk about this. Like, why? So if somebody's hearing this, I'm like, okay, like beyond missionary, like novelty, passionate, I'm interested. Let's talk a little bit more about like why is this conversation important? Like what from a value perspective can engaging with kink bring to a relationship?
So I think engaging in kink can bring a deeper level of communication where it's not just about sex and what feels good, it's about what turns you on, sort of the emotion and intrigue behind just the physical act of sex. So for some people, it might be like, I like to give up control. I like to take control. I like to plan out a scene. I like to role play as a schoolgirl, as a secretary, as a doctor, you know? It brings us to a point where we're moving beyond just the, again, physical side of sex of like, oh, I like it when you touch here. I like it when you do this. It goes that level deeper to, I like it when you make me feel a certain way, or I like getting to feel a certain way during sex or in the bedroom, you know? And honestly, this can just be a fun way to ante up the foreplay. It doesn't even have to be about the sex. It can just be about the before, where you are learning how to turn someone on. And as they say, your brain is your biggest sexual organ, right? And this is how you play with that a little bit.
Yeah, I think when you're talking, like one of the things that comes up for me is like very psychological. It, like takes me to like Carl Jung and like his concepts on like archetypes, right? And, his work and I like people have gone so many different ways since he introduced this concept with what that actually means. And I look at some of that work as like, hey, we all have all of these different forces inside of us, right? And he would use the word archetypes, but these forces are like, okay, well, sometimes I like to feel this way and this is part of me. Sometimes I like to feel this way and this is part of me. I was talking to my girlfriends at a party this weekend about the idea of like the range of life of like all the different parts of ourselves that we get to actually have. We have a large range as humans around what we're interested in, around what we're good at, around what, turns us on, what makes us feel certain ways. And I look at this in many ways as like kink is one way that it's like a very, it's a safe way that we can actually start to explore the range of different feelings that we get to experience in life, right?
Totally. I mean, and even when you mention that, I also think it's just so unfair that I feel like so often everyone has this range, but we're bucketed. We're sort of like put in the bucket of what our most forward personality is. You know what I mean? And sometimes that stops us from being able to like explore different interests because we even put ourselves in this mindset of that's not me or I don't do that thing. But it's just that you haven't discovered that you do that thing yet or that you enjoy that thing yet.
And I think yet's a key, yet is a key word because it like always, linguistically always predisposes us like, okay, well, we say yet, it predisposes that might change someday. And I see this, right? Like even in research on anal sex, right? Anal sex, the number of couples that actually start to be interested in anal sex, you see the spike go up in the 40s. And so it's like so interesting, right? That like, oh, like there's many, like what that tells me is even in something like that, there's like all this time pre-life or not pre-life. That's not what I meant to say at all. Pre-40s, there's much life before 40s. There's all this time though in couples pre-40s where it's like, well, I'm not interested and I'm not interested and I'm not interested. And then all of a sudden we see in research that then couples like decide that they are. So I think it's a key point you're saying here around, hey, just being open to various things because just because that's not on the table right now, our desires change, our wants change, our needs change, our preferences change, right?
They really do. But also, I think it's our comfort levels and our ability to be vulnerable changes because, in your 20s and 30s, you're still quite self conscious about how you look, how you feel, how you might smell. Like these types of things that I believe couples together for longer periods of time, that subsides. But also, just as you become more confident, you realize that's life. All of these things are normal. You know what I mean? And it allows you to branch out just that little bit more.
So that I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to throw a curveball question for you, and it's totally okay if you don't know this, but I think it'd be a helpful thing because I'm curious around this concept of normal, right? Because I think when it comes to trying things, that's often what happens in the human brain around like, oh, this is so weird, this is not normal, what's happening? So from the terminology of normal, and for those of you that are not watching this, I'm doing air quotes as I say normal. But from that standpoint, do you have any sense, like statistically, like how many people are interested in kink? Have you ever looked that up?
Okay, so there are no actual numbers on it. And part of that is because the definition is so broad of what kink is. But if in my professional experience of talking to people who swear to me that they are totally vanilla and they are, and vanilla people who would be considered vanilla hate to be called vanilla because there's even a negative connotation to with that. I would say I'm a firm believer about 90% of people are kinky according to the standard definition of it, of liking anything outside of missionary penis and vagina sex. I mean, we could get into not penis and vagina sex too, but I think most people enjoy a little bit of dirty talk. They'll enjoy role play from time to time. So the question becomes is even trying kink and enjoying one kinky thing, does that make you kinky? I think it does. So I would say non-kinksters are actually in the minority.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what I was looking to do, is almost like normalize this conversation around like this is actually just part of the human, psyche in many ways, to be interested in trying things and exploring things and experiencing pleasure in different ways. And I think the more we can get like the taboo out of like this is weird, and just, like you said, like this probably like way more on the normal side than anything else, I think it helps people break down any sort of stigma maybe that's like preventing them from exploring this.
Yes, and I think there's a ton of stigma. Like I could get on my soapbox all day about this. I think the media creates a lot of the stigma by creating this image of people who are into kink as people dressed in all black, tattoos everywhere. And that's totally fine. Like that's a wonderful expression of self. But I don't think people realize, if you could open everybody's bedside drawer, what would you find in there?
Right.
Like everyone likes to think, oh, that's something other people do. But like the sales of vibrators, handcuffs, cuffs alone tell us that that is not actually the truth.
Right. It's just something that we have not gotten accustomed to talking about it. So because it's not, it's not in common language to talk about this stuff, everybody thinks like, oh, this is something that I have to hide in private because this is the weird thing that I do when they're probably at a party and most people at the party do the same thing.
People are. Most people have done some dirty talk. They have tied someone up. They have been tied up. It is so much more common than people realize. And it is, like you're saying, because no one talks about it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so then let's talk about that. Like, so how do we begin? If somebody is interested in exploring more of this, right? How do they begin to talk to their partner about it? Where do we start?
So the place I always say to start is number one, do your own research. Find out what you're interested in trying, okay? And for a lot of people, I think they kind of know already things that they might be interested in because it's piqued their curiosity at some point in their life and they just haven't been ready to explore it. So what I always say is like once you have a grasp on that, with your partner, lead with curiosity. Ask your partner, what are you interested in trying or exploring? And then listen, find out what they want to try. That might inspire ideas for you. Then it's also the perfect segue for you to introduce the things you want to try as well, right? So create a two-way conversation from the beginning by leading with curiosity. Then from that point, I think that you could begin to share ideas together and say like, well, what if we tried this? What if this is something we tried? And this is such a common question that I get that I created a free resource for people to be able to guide themselves through this as a couple. And it's called Speaking Your Desires with Confidence. You can download that on my site. And the reason I created that is because it's one of the most common questions I get. And I do mean every day. People will message me, they'll DM me and say like, how do I introduce this to my partner? How do I tell them what I'm interested in? And I think it's funny because everybody, for the most part, loves sex. Not everybody loves talking about sex.
Just a quick break to let you know that 80% of women do not have orgasms from vaginal intercourse alone. So many people are not having the type of sex that is healing, that brings them closer, that brings them more connected, that is full of so much pleasure and passion that it can build bones, reduce stress, help serotonin, bring happiness, lower anxiety, improve sleep, and build a better connection with your partner. That is what hot and modern monogamy is modern monogamy that brings in all of that passion.
It can be quite a vulnerable conversation that is understandable. Like, we have been taught not to talk about it, to keep it secret, to not stand out too much. Both men and women have been taught this. So it's a difficult conversation to have, but one that's well worth having once you get the ball rolling.
And we'll have everybody, we'll make sure to have a link of that in the show notes from Amanda today as well, that free resource to support you. So my curiosity with that then is, do you also recommend, like if somebody is saying, okay, well, I'm going to be curious, I'm going to ask my partner questions, I really want to do this, I'm going to listen intently, really hear what they're saying. But do you ever have people have strategies then on like teaching them from more of the receptive side around how to respond, right? Because I think some fear that people can have sometimes is like, okay, like somebody's asking me, right, as something and they're being curious. There might be a fear, and this is not my situation since I'm in this world and worked through this, but I could, and in the past, I would have had a fear of, well, am I going to be judged by that person if I actually tell them the truth back? So do you have any sort of process where you're actually training people like how to respond in a way where it's like, well, if that kink, if I hear my partner say it as something they're interested in and I'm not interested in, and that's like really shocking to me, which I don't find that that's what has happened most of the time, but having a process for that, I think sometimes alleviates the fears. Do you have anything you guide people in that conversation anyway?
That is super common, right? But the reason that people will put up resistance to specific kinks or things is so personal that is when I do recommend people hire a coach, because it's the nuance of it. I think one of my favorite examples to give is cuckolding. Like, a lot of men have the fantasy of seeing their wives have sex with somebody else, right? And the wives, for multiple reasons, might be against that, right? That is when you need that one-on-one interaction with a coach. And I truly believe that's important, is because societally women have been definitely raised to think just one man. Do you know what I mean? That's your virtue in finding one man to have sex with. Anything else is slutty. Anything else is wrong. Not only that, your man should want to hold you to themselves and only want to be with you. So like, cuckolding is my favorite example for this, because it's like there are so many different things that could be coming up for someone that they don't even understand how to unravel as to why they might have a resistance towards this kink. And that is why I recommend, that's the point you hire a coach, is if someone has that resistance, because it is a lot to ask someone to accept someone else's kink and dive into themselves and understand why they're resistant to it. And I would not want to just put out a freebie worksheet on like, go through these steps, because it is so nuanced. But like, if someone was really dedicated to figuring it out on their own, I would say one of the things to do is understand where the resistance is coming up and ask yourself, why is it coming up at this stage? What do I believe to be true that makes this quote unquote wrong or dirty or something that grosses me out, right? And you start to peel back the layers there. And it could be any number of those things. It could be that I don't want to be with someone who wants to see me have sex with someone else. I want a quote unquote manly man to protect me, who is jealous. And these different types of things are coming up, and you need to ask, well, why do I believe that? Is it truly important to me, or has society just told me it is?
Yeah.
Really great point though. But that is where the real nuance comes in.
So then what about this? So my next question is, because sometimes I find that some kinks, some fantasies are really like great for the couple like to explore. Like sometimes people are like, yeah, like a kink or a fantasy comes up and they explore it and it's awesome. And other times I find that some of these things are just like more fun, and like there might be that fantasy, but actually in reality, they might not actually truly want it, right? And it's like, and it could be that, cuckolding could be a great example of that around, okay, this is fun to fantasize about, and maybe we can even role play this. But the idea of actually doing it in real life might not actually have that same impact as leaving that in the fantasy. So I'm wondering like how much you see that come up in your work and how you help couples kind of differentiate or like, oh yeah, this is a cool thing. Like let's bring this in versus like, let's keep this role play in fantasy and dreamland and not actually do it in reality.
That's a really great question. And it's also one that comes up quite often. More often than not, this is the advice I give, especially when someone even just says they want to have a threesome, right? So, this is something if I'm working with clients, I'll sit down with both of them at the same time and make them talk through it. But this is what I recommend. I want you and your partner to sit down and talk about how you're going to meet the person you want to do whatever it is with. Are you going to talk to them individually or do you both need to talk to them at the same time? Where is this act going to take place? I literally make people break it down and I ask these questions one on one, but these are questions that are easy to ask each other. It's basically like paint the picture beginning to end. Tell me how each step goes, how you meet them, what you're talking about, what's off limits, what's okay. And through that process, in real time, it's really interesting to see because one person's answering and the other person's looking shocked. Like, first of all, I never thought about this. Second of all, this is definitely not how I imagine it going. Inspire the conversation so people are forced to not leave anything up to surprise. So I see it quite often. And that's what I try and prepare people for. But yes, there are times afterwards where I will have couples come to me and they'll say, we had this experience. It didn't go well because of XYZ. And truly, had they just had that long form conversation in advance, I think it would have alleviated a lot of it. So my recommendation is to go step by step, like paint the entire picture. And my favorite thing to say is, if I say the word house to you, I say, imagine house. You could think of a mansion, a little shack. You could think of Dr. House, ND, the TV show. The range of what a house is so large. Why would sex, a threesome, or cuckolding be any different? So you should really like paint the picture before you get into it.
Yeah.
The worst thing for me, I think, is knowing that a relationship suffers because they tried to explore something when a simple conversation beforehand may have alleviated a lot of the stress that comes afterwards.
Yeah, I've seen that down to like, even levels where I'm like, okay, like threesome ends. How do we care for each other after? Like what's happening in the goodbyes, like that whole thing. And I do think sometimes that can make some people like, oh wow, like I hadn't thought about these details. And it's like seems like you said, it seems like hot if like everybody's picturing like the sexy mansion. But, sometimes it's like when you paint those details out, it also can add that clarity for either one, this is how we do and take care of each other, or two, maybe this is actually better for fantasy because now that I'm thinking out steps, 1 through 100, it doesn't actually sound as hot as I thought it did.
Exactly, because it's sort of like I will go as deep as saying, okay, are you going to go down on the person? I'll say it, and it's sort of like that question alone can really stop people. And I'm like, okay, and while this person's going down on you, what's your husband doing? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Those kinds of questions really make people think, and then that puts them in the mindset of, wait, do I really want this?
Yeah.
That is the question you want to be asking before you get into it, because being in the room and asking, do I really want this, isn't the best case scenario.
No, that's often where things go very, very wrong and can create sometimes trauma that has to be worked through.
Uh, And that's why I really push for people to talk through every step of the way, because it is sad when people are in my office because of that, and it's like, I'm feeling really hurt and you just want to jump in and save them or like turn back time. And one of the ways to do that is to have the conversation in advance.
Yeah, I love it. And such good advice. What about just general misconceptions? Are there any like general misconceptions on kink that you want to throw out here that we make sure we kind of rectify?
Oh, yes. Okay. Number one, kink does not come from trauma, or at least all kink does not come from trauma. People love to jump on that and say like, oh, everyone who's into kink has just been traumatized. I myself have, okay, everyone has some trauma in life. We don't go through life without it, right? But I can say with certainty, my enjoyment of kink and fetish has nothing to do with my childhood, nothing that happened to me as a child. It is something that I truly was born with, right? And that happens for so many people. They understand they enjoy a physical sensation and it is completely divorced from anything that happened in their past. But of course, some kink does come from trauma. A lot of people work through their trauma by introducing kink and being able to take hold of it and owning it. and being in control of a situation that may have occurred for them. So some does come from trauma, some doesn't, and it's impossible to say. So that's like my number one myth that I love to clear out. The second one is that all kink is just whips and chains. So much of it is not that I don't even know where to begin with that. A lot of it is power play. It's that certain role play, or even just saying good girl. Like a guy telling, while having sex, saying good girl, that's a form of kink. It's praise kink, The range is huge, and it doesn't need to look any type of way, right? It is highly customizable. What is kinky to you might be normal to me, vice versa, or it might be kinky to everyone, like really kinky. And to you, it might just be like a nice thing to do from time to time, So there's no one way it can look. And then I would say this one drives me the most nuts, this myth. It's that people say, oh, people who are into kink are just better communicators. And that's just not true, right? I know plenty of non-kinksters in relationships. They've been married for 30 plus years. They're the best communicators I know. It has nothing to do with kink or not. I don't care how deep you go into kink. Some people are just strong communicators and others are not. But yes, if you are doing kink right, you are going to be forced to train the muscles of like, how do you have a deep conversation? But it doesn't naturally make you a better communicator. So those are my like big myths that I like love to get out of the way. And from there, people do like to ask questions, and I'm always like happy to answer. But those 3 myths I think are important to get straight.
Yeah, I love those myths. I think that's really important, especially I think the one that I feel like I hear the most common is the whips and chains one, around like, hey, there's so much more to this world. And if you're not into whips and chains, like there's so much that does not eliminate by any means the idea of exploring kink.
100%. And that's like absolutely true. In fact, whips and chains is probably like 2% of the market of,
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's probably the media that's really got that into people's consciousness, and that's so much, I think, of how sex is portrayed in people's images of it's just these random things that would get sprinkled in the media, and now there's this belief.
Yeah, and not even just kink. I think sex in general. I mean, and you have to remember that when it is portrayed in the media, it's always going to look the same way. Like after a sex scene, the woman is going to have the sheet up to here, the guy is going to have the sheet down here, and like that's not reality either.
Right.
Those things out to be like, this is how unlike reality it is on TV and movies.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, this has been such a great conversation. Is there anything you want to leave us with? And before I actually let you answer that, just to remind everybody, you can get part 2 with Amanda by going down into the show notes and clicking on the link, which is modernmonogamyclub.com. We're going to talk in there in part 2 on steps to introduce kink into relationships, what happens if something doesn't go right, how to rectify that, and so much more. And so I want to make sure that you guys get the free guide that Amanda offered for us. We'll put that in the show notes too, on speaking your desires with confidence. If that is interesting to you, and tell us a little bit more about anything you want to wrap up with, as well as how people get a hold of you.
Sure. So you can book a consult with me on amandadames.com. And the final thing that I like to leave everyone with is, do not stay in a relationship that you don't feel comfortable opening up about who you are and what you're interested in, right? Because you will spend your entire life hiding a part of you that might just be the most authentic version of yourself. And I worked as a professional dominatrix. I worked with people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I talked to them about what their regrets were around not sharing this early on. And that is basically what I built my business on, is helping people to explore these conversations and doing it earlier in life so they're not hiding a part of themselves.
And such good advice and great thing to end on. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of The Lounge. I'll see you all soon. Ciao for now.
Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibidodoc.com.